Hi, this is Dan Thompson. In this video, we're going to quickly cover the main points as to why indexed universal life makes me really nervous, and it should you too. Now, this is the Reader's Digest version video. We have a much more in-depth video where we discuss both the indexed and the variable universal policies in greater detail. It's called the IUL and VUL implosion, an in-depth look. I wanted to do this video as well to simply hit the main points and to keep the video shorter. However, I really encourage you to watch the video that has a much more in-depth look to really understanding the problems facing IUL and VUL. So here are the 6 main reasons why IUL could be set up for an implosion. Number 1, they're completely market driven. Markets better perform or it's over. 2, you don't get the dividend on the index. 3, the cost of insurance goes up every year. 4, we're living longer, which means higher costs for longer lifespans. 5, the illustrations have to perform exactly as shown or they're worthless. And 6, the rate of return might be unattainable. See, an IUL has 2 parts to it. The first is an annual renewable term insurance, which buys your death benefit. Now, this isn't the cheap 10-year or 20-year term you hear advertised on the radio. This is expensive 1-year term insurance that gets more and more expensive each year based on your age. The older you get, the more expensive it becomes. Again, it may not be so bad in your 20s or 30s, but incredibly expensive if you happen to live too long, into your 60s, 70s, or heaven forbid, into your 80s. You see, if the cost of insurance is constantly escalating, your market returns have to keep up or you'll begin to go backwards. It's kind of like rolling a rock uphill. Each year that hill gets steeper and steeper. The other side of the IUL, or the second part, is the savings or the investment side, where you participate with a stock market index to grow your cash value. Any returns on your cash value are solely based on that stock market index going up. The way an indexed universal life works is that it participates with the market by purchasing an option on the index. Now, it can be a little bit complicated to understand, but options give you the ability to rise with the market, but they can also avoid market losses when it goes down. An option has a fixed cost or a fixed loss if it expires worthless. So an IUL buys an option on the index, which has a cost. What most people don't understand, not even the sales guys that typically sell this stuff, is when you buy an option on the index, you don't get the dividend of that index. The only way you can ever get a dividend on an index is to invest into it directly. Now let me explain why that's important to know. Most analysts agree that the S&P 500 indexes there includes a total return, but in that total return there's a dividend of about 2%. So if the return on the index was, say, 8% for the year, 2% of it is assumed to have come from the dividends paid by the stocks held in the S&P 500. An indexed universal life does not get that dividend because, again, they bought an option, not invested in the index directly. So when you see the returns of the S&P 500, you have to discount the return by at least 2% for the dividend. I'm going to use the same returns that we used in the more in-depth video. This is where we use the return of the S&P 500 from 1990 to 2010. The average was 10.38, but the actual compounded return is 8.54. Plus we have to minus 2% from the dividend, which brings us closer to about 6.5%. By the way, you have to understand the difference between average and actual returns. Suffice it to say that average can be very deceiving. You need to know the actual return. Here's a quick example. Suppose you have $100,000. If you go up 40% one year, then down 40% the next year, you've technically averaged 0, right? I mean, plus 40 minus 40 equals 0. What's the actual return though? Well, 100,000 plus 40% is 140,000. If the next year it goes down 40%, that means it loses $56,000. Your 100,000 is now worth $84,000. You actually lost 16,000 or 16%, but you averaged 0. See how averages can be so deceiving? All right, so back to where we were. When they show you returns of 6%, you think they're being really fair, but in actuality, they're pretty much showing you the total return maxed out over 20 years, as you can see when you look at the actual returns minus the dividend, not averages. It may not get any better than that. I'll bet very few of those who sell these index ULs have an understanding of how the actual returns work. Now we have our return for the year. Now we have to deduct the cost of insurance. That might mean another 1 or 2%, and that might only be while you're younger. It could be 10 or 50 or even 150% more with no cap on the cost of insurance the older you get. That's why I say an IUL might work out okay if you hit the markets perfectly in your lifetime, but just be sure not to live too long. By the way, there's no way to hit the markets perfectly. Every 20 or 30-year cycle has its ups and downs. Now let's really put this into perspective. For the sake of time, again, we're going to hit this really quickly. In an IUL, because your worst year is 0, you think that if the market tanks or remains flat, that you're okay because you didn't lose anything, right? Sounds good, but is that actually the case? Well, no, that's not the case. You see, you still have your costs coming out each and every year, in particular, the cost of insurance. But you also missed out on a year of growth too, and that's huge when it comes to the illustrations. So suppose we have an illustration that shows a 6% annual return. They may talk in averages, but now you know this has to be actual returns or you're going to be toast. They convince you that 6% is fair and it's reasonable based on what the S&P 500 might have done. But here's the problem. We can't just average 6%. We have to actually get 6% every year. What those illustrations are really showing is that you are going up and you're going to get 6% every year. And then the numbers would come out as they illustrate them. But the problem is that the illustrations are showing actual returns, not average returns. We can't get those confused. Sad to say, that's not how the market works, as you probably well know. It doesn't produce returns every year. For instance, let's say we get a 0 for the year. That means the market probably went down if we get the 0. In that year, though, we didn't get the 6% return as was projected. And we still have to deduct the cost of insurance from our cash value. That takes the policy backwards. It technically is a loss. So the next year it's projected to earn 6% again. And remember, as we already talked about, it needs to net a 6% return, which means the index probably had to do 8 or 9% that year because we don't get the dividend. But again, you get the idea there. So in order to keep up with the illustration, we now have to get a 6% for this year. We also have to get a 6% that we missed out on last year. And we've got the cost of insurance for last year. And we've got the cost insurance for this year. This is just to get back on track based on the illustrations that they showed you. You see, a 0 year has to be made up for at some point because ongoing costs and to keep up the annual 6% projections on the illustration. If we get behind a few years, we may have to have a market return 20 or 25% just to get us back on course. Oh, but there's one other additional problem. Most IULs have a cap on your return. It may be somewhere around 12 to 14%. That means in any one year, you won't be credited any more than that cap rate, no matter how high the market goes up. Again, that sounds kind of fair, right? I mean, you'd take 14 or 12%, wouldn't you? That might be very nice if the market never went down or gave you a 0. But if you get behind 20% because of the few zeros and the market goes up 20%, you may only be able to recapture 12 to 14% depending on your cap. I know, again, 12%, 12 or 14% sounds great when looking at the illustration, but now you can see it can actually prevent you from catching up too. Suppose we go 3 years of zero. We think we're doing okay again because we don't lose any money. However, we have a really big problem. We are now way behind where the illustration said we should be. Now look what the IUL has to do. It has to get us 6% from the first year we had a zero. It also has to get us 6% we missed out on in year 2 and get us 6% that we missed out on year 3. Add to that the cost of insurance for all 3 years as well. Well, we're way behind the ball now. In fact, that rock that we're pushing uphill just might be starting to roll back on us, and we're going to get mushed. See, you may never be able to catch up and certainly not do what the illustrations show unless you absolutely get that 6% every year. And that's only 3 years. If you have an illustration for 20 or 30 years, how many years do you think that you might get a zero? If the market does what it has in the past, you may have 5 or 10 years of zeros, and that could be devastating compared to the illustration. You see, zero sounds pretty good until you realize the illustration is based on you getting 6% every year, year in and year out, never missing a year without fail. It can't average 6%. It has to actually get 6% each and every year for that illustration to be realized. That is a tall order, wouldn't you agree? It just doesn't happen. I mean, I've been in this business for 30 years and I've never seen a market give us 6% year in and year out without fail. Now again, if you're in your 30s and the cost of insurance is low, you may survive for a while until you get older. But when you get into your twilight years, that cost of insurance could eat you alive. It could be lights out if you have a few zero years in your 70s and if you're taking income. One company has a so-called fix for this ever-increasing cost of insurance. They realize the costs are uncontrollable in the later years of life. They know that if you live too long, that cost of insurance is horrendous. They also know that we are living longer, that medical science is keeping us around. So what they did is they brought the cost of insurance down to a more reasonable level in your later years of life. They actually made it affordable, if you will, if you live longer. And that sounds pretty good, right? But it's fictitious. It's sleight of hand. The cost seems to be lower in your older years, but do you know how they offset it? They don't pay the death benefit out in a lump sum. You see, in any insurance policy, when the insured dies, a lump sum is paid to the beneficiaries. If you have $1 million death benefit, check is cut for $1 million. As a way to control those horrendous, out-of-control costs of insurance if you live too long, they don't pay the death benefit in a lump sum. That's right, no large death benefit check at death. The insurance company pays you out over 30 years. Can you believe that? They put the death benefit in an account at 1% and pay out your beneficiaries over 30 years. This is the only way the insurance company can recoup the cost of insurance that they fictitiously reduced to make the policy look better by keeping the cost down in the later years. So why would an insurance company require a payout over 30 years? Because even they understand that the cost of insurance can eat the policy alive. They aren't stupid. They understand mortality. They know it's not possible for a policy to perform if someone lived into their late 80s, 90s, or even 100s. It would implode. And so they had to do something about it. Rather than getting faced with a bunch of angry policyholders or beneficiaries who lose all their cash value to the cost of insurance, the insurance company basically eats part of those costs while they're older, so it looks better, but then pays out the death benefit over 30 years to make up for it, and then some. So my question is, why don't the guys who sell this stuff see that? It's smoke and mirrors. It's making something look good while you're living and having something that's really bad when you die. Let me give you a perfect example of costs that are associated inside of universal policies. This is an example of a variable policy, but it could easily have been an IUL as well. The situation is a person bought a VUL in their late 60s. The cost of insurance for $1.8 million death benefit was $10,000 for the first year. The idea was to overfund it, put in $50,000 a year for 5 years, and then the cash value was supposed to grow substantially and cover the cost of insurance the rest of their life. Well, fast forward, this person now lived into their late 80s. They accidentally lived too long. The policy was funded with $250,000 in the first 5 years. The market growth, again, was supposed to take care of the policy from that point on. Well, the cash value lasted about 5 years. It's been long gone and eaten up. The only way to keep the policy going and have a death benefit is to pay more premiums just to cover the cost of insurance. That cost of insurance has increased every year like it does in all universal life policies. Remember, the insurance cost started out at $10,000 the first year. This year, the premium, just to keep the policy from lapsing, is now $34,000 per quarter. Yes, that's over $130,000 a year just for the cost of insurance. No cash value, no income. That's over 13 times more than the first year's cost of insurance. If this person quit paying premium, they would literally walk away from nearly $1 million that they've put in premium over the years. In just a few more years, they will have put in more premium than the death benefit will be. Now, they're one of the few lucky ones. They had the capacity and other assets to continue to pay that premium. Not many could come up with an extra $130,000 a year. They really have no choice but to pay the premium because obviously who wants to walk away from $1 million? I just hope they continue to have the assets to pay the premiums, or really all's lost. Let me leave you with these final points. Number one, zero is not zero in an IUL. There's still costs, fees, and of course the cost of insurance taken out each year. The cost of insurance is ever increasing, and without using gimmicks and tricks and fictitiously trying to keep those costs down, those costs are going to eat up that cash value at some point. Average return is deceptive. It's the actual return that drives the policy. Averages lie, as we can see, and are typically useless in projections. Number four, your beneficiaries may have to take payments for 30 years just to get the full death benefit. And number five, the longer you live, the greater chance that these have to implode. Now, to understand what you can do as an alternative, you need to look at our video discussing whole life. You'll see the stark contrast and why guarantees and predictability are a much safer way to build and accumulate cash value, and to have a tax-free income stream without worrying about living too long. And the best part, you don't have to rely on the stock market for your returns. Look, you've probably already have plenty of money at risk in the market, or you've had plenty at risk in the years previous. There's no need to gamble on this asset. You'll also see a huge benefit in dividend-paying companies that have never missed paying a dividend in 150 years or more. It's really incredible. So that's it for this video. Again, it's short and sweet. Now you know why an IUL could be dangerous, and it's a tough bet to bet your future on. Once again, I encourage you, if you want a more in-depth look, please check out our video, the IUL and VUL implosion and in-depth look. If you have any questions, please email me. I'll get them answered just as quickly as possible. Until then, we will see you on our next video. Take care.